being here. This morning we will start with our first series of panels with an introduction from Lord British and Star Long, Darkstarr, formerly Lord Blackthorn. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So everybody put your hands together, get your notepads out, and get ready to ask some questions in the next couple hours.
There, thank you. Hey, and Zeke, really thank you. I mean, it was really you yourself, as well as the other members of the BMC that had done the previous events here in Austin, that graciously expanded that into what has now become SotaCon. And I know you and your team are still, at the heartbeat of bringing this all together. So thank you, and thank the rest of the folks in that group. Laz, obviously for yourself and the rest of the BNN crew, thank you so much for the great work you do as a core of the community, much less also for helping get this all together. Russ, I don't know what all the things you were involved in. Where are you? Right there you go. You were like lugging stuff around, so I assume you were also deep in the middle of this. And so apologies for not naming everybody that I know is on your team, but also it's great to see so many Dukes out. We even have Kabbalists who have shown up. We have fishermen and other role players as well. It's really just great to see all of you all out. We literally wouldn't be here without you, and it's exciting to be here with you. So thanks.
All right, so we'll get started. So I'm Star Long. I've been only doing this about 25 years. So I always have to say that only because I work with him. And I answered an ad in the newspaper here in town that said video game testers wanted. That's all it said. It didn't say who or where or anything like that. I actually have a degree in theater, not in computers at all, although I loved computers and played games my whole life. But turns out making a steady living in theater is,
Tricky.
Yeah. And so I needed some supplemental income, and my friends and I were joking the night before I went for the interview that this couldn't be a real job, that I would show up and there would be guys in lab coats at University of Texas Psychology Department and be like, oh, you're the kind of person who would show up for this kind of ad, and could you answer some demographic kind of profiling questions for us? Because but no, it was at his company, and I tried to play it cool, not go, oh my God, it's Origin and it's Lord British, oh God. I think I played it cool. Anyway, so I started in QA, and my plan was actually, I had gotten my bachelor's degree, and my plan was actually to go get a graduate degree in theater. But about 2 weeks in, I was like, oh no, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And not only that, I want to run the company. And so I called my parents, and I've got good news and bad news. The good news is, I found a career that I want to pursue for the rest of my life. The bad news is I'm not going to go back to graduate school. And they were like, oh no, that's good news. That means we don't have to pay for graduate school, right? And I'm like, oh yeah. And they're like, oh no, that's great. That was back in 1995, and when I was starting QA and kind of worked my way up, and then pitched Ultima Online, and which wasn't a hard pitch because the idea of a multiplayer Ultima had been batted around before, but the technology really just wasn't ready for it. And Ultima really was a recreation of Richard's playing Dungeons and Dragons. All the companions were his friends playing Dungeons and Dragons, right? And actually the original pitch for Ultima Online was just a simple multiplayer game, not the massively multiplayer game it ended up being. Anyway, so that's so I moved out of QA to make Ultima Online, and that was history. We just did the 20th anniversary event up in Virginia. That was awesome. The most surreal moment, though, was being introduced to a couple saying, hey, we met in the game, we got married in the game, then we got married in real life, and we had children, and here's our 20-year-old child who is now playing the game. So that was a pretty surreal moment. So hopefully that's going to happen 20 years from now. I'll meet somebody's 20-year-old.
So who's procreating first?
Yeah. And so Richard and I worked together at Origin. We did Ultima Online. Then we left and formed another company called Destination Games and became part of NCSoft. And then I briefly left and went and worked at Disney for a while. And then Richard lured me back to do this. And I couldn't say no, Well, I could. The deal was if the Kickstarter was successful, I would come back, and if it wasn't, I wouldn't. And so luckily the Kickstarter was successful, and now we've been working together since then. And then there's this guy.
Yeah, and obviously Richard Garriott, Lord British, and I know most of you know a lot of this, but I'll just point out a few things that might be some details you don't know. 20 years is obviously it is in fact a long time in this industry, but I go back to I actually calculated it recently. It's 43 years. So I've been making computer games for 43 years now. Going back to the true beginnings that we were talking about, not just the Apple II, but this teletype that preceded it. In fact, I have a teletype right now at the Bob Bullock Texas History Museum that is not the literal one I used, but is identical to the one that I utilized. That goes back to before there were CRTs. You had to you type your programs directly on an electromechanical typewriter. They would print out, or not print out, it would punch holes in a strip of paper tape to store the program on, and then you would read those strips of paper tape into a computer to temporarily run the game, or whatever it is you wrote. And almost immediately, starting in 1975, I started creating games, and they were in fact homages to my D&D world. In fact, they were called D&D 1, and then D&D 2, and then D&D 3. And actually, up at the office, I can't remember if they're in my office or at my house. I can't remember, but I still have all the notebooks, because you wouldn't just write directly on the computer because there was no editor. So you would actually write it out in a notebook and do all your debugging in a notebook, and then only if you found that or felt that was working would you then there you go, coming back. Would you then type it in and then run it and see if it worked? And so a lot of so through high school I wrote 28 D&D 1 through D&D 28. Then when the Apple II came out, converted that to the Apple II with graphics inspired by a low-res graphics game called Escape. They created a Calibeth, which is sort of Ultima Zero, and then. For me, if you go back to these early days like I do, it's kind of one of the interesting side effects was, I wasn't the only one that started at this time. There were other people like Bob Woodhead we were talking about outside who did the Wizardry games, John Van Canegum and Brian Fargo with Might and Magic and Bard's Tale also go back to about that same period. But what's interesting about doing that, which we all kind of started when we were 19 years old. And so it was really no one older than us, right? So if you were older than us, you really didn't get this chance. And so, when I turned 20, some new people came into the gaming industry who were 19. And when I turned 21, some new people came in who were 19. And so I have perpetually been the oldest person in the industry, or pretty close to it. And it's been kind of a surreal ride to, get a chance to be around for the growth of an industry from scratch. And had the chance to, whether, hopefully some by skill and I know some by luck, get a chance to help set some of the standards that became, tropes or design paradigms for role-playing games broadly. The word avatar, 3D graphics, really, even for that matter. Tile graphics, absolutely. The word avatar, didn't I just say that? But then, with Star, doing MMORPGs, and we've really had the opportunity to kind of reset and advance the state of the art in some interesting and potentially important ways, down through the years. And I hope that we're doing that again here with Shroud of the Avatar. Even we'll talk about that more later. But even just the simple piece of selectively multiplayer, I think is an important tool for how client-server operations operate for games in the future. And so hopefully we'll continue to make these kind of contributions.
All right. So, Richard and I talked about what we were going to discuss in this opening thing. And so we actually we have a few slides, and there's a few things that we wanted to show you guys. And Unfortunately, we don't have the screen, so it'll be a little challenging, but maybe we can.
In your mind's eye.
I'll flip around. You can sort of come up and look at it if you want. But we purposely kept it short because for this opening thing, we wanted to give you a chance to just sort of ping us with questions. But really what we wanted to focus on were the top 10 priorities that we're working on and talk about some specific examples of how we're executing against those. And so just as a reminder of what those priorities are, the number one is to reduce load times. We're a scene-based game, which has, as we've talked about, has a lot of pros. That is the reason why we can all play on one server. So that is the reason why we're not on separate servers, we're not on shards, etc. It means that we can, whenever we want, update a scene, and we don't have to worry about seamlessly stitching that into the surrounding scenes. So that means all the scene uncloning we're doing, or any dynamic updates to scenes, or doing things like the town sieges. A scene-based game allows us to do that really easily. The downside to a scene-based game is the load times, and so because you spend a lot of time going from scene to scene to scene, you spend a lot of time looking at a load screen, and so it's absolutely critical for a game that's based around moving from scene to scene that those load times are really, really, really short. So that's our number one priority. Which
at the moment.
Right. And then right after that is client performance. I mean, it has to be smooth. It has to be fast. We have to have a consistent 30 frames per second all the time and without hitching. Number three is we got to get a better reward cycle. Right now, it's got some points where it's good, but overall it's not great. So that has to get better. We have to give much clearer player direction, and we can't just say, "Oh, it's immersive." We have to do much more polish on the story. We have to get better enemy behaviors. We have to polish the UI. We have to have better new user experience. The game has to get localized, and of course, there's a whole bunch of things that we have to do for launch readiness, including security and hardware and all that kind of stuff. And all of that is part of what Richard likes to talk about.
Yeah, about quality. And you've probably heard me say this on the forums and things too. But obviously we've made a lot of games. In our days we've made a lot of games, and so there are things we know about what the process feels like from beginning to end of a game, having done it many times. That since we're now a crowd-funded and therefore open to you all game. And many of you have been participating since the chicken room, the small room with a chair and a torch and a chicken. And so this is very likely for most of the players their first time to kind of go on this journey from the beginning to end and kind of know what the game should feel like at various moments. I mean, you wouldn't have been during the chicken room days. None of you would have had any illusions that there was a game behind there, right? There was no game. It was just a prototype, or not even a prototype hardly. But now that the game sort of feels like a game, it's much easier for people to go like, wow, it kind of feels like a game, but it's wrong. There's something not right about it. And in my mind, that's normal. That is, in fact, the people who come latest to the party are the ones who are most likely to feel this stress of, well, it sort of looks finished, but the performance is bad, or the story doesn't make any sense, or the balance is way off, and therefore become frustrated. And my message to everybody is this is normal for this moment in time. That in all games I've been a part of, it's the last 20% of the time where 80% of what you feel about the quality of the experience goes in. Prior to that, you're just all doing framework. And while you might see us try to rebalance things just to make sure it's not really bad, I mean exceptionally bad, we're really just loosely integrating all the parts together. And it's in this last 20% that you make it all sing together. You tune it all up, and it begins to feel right. And it's important to not only get to this last 20%, but I also think that if you look at all the games we've ever launched as Origin or Destination or anytime really, if you are able to do this last 20% and polish the game properly, you will have a great experience that you intended to have, or at least the experience you intended to have. If you are forced to get it out the door too soon, which often happens sadly, then you will have blown 80% of your quality. I mean, it will make a gigantic difference in the perception of the game. And what's happening right now? There's a story that's happening right now within the game. There was one of the folks, might have been one of you here, I can't remember who it was, but somebody recently finished the storyline as it is now written, and he wrote in this very long, detailed set of concerns. He said, "Wow, I made it all the way through to the end, and here's what I think." He said, I got my shroud, but I wasn't sure what to do with it, or I thought it was weird that Arabella came into the room even though the guards told me no one's allowed in. And he wrote up all these these thoughts about the whole thing, and then at the bottom he goes, I really love this game, but I have deep concerns because this is just wrong. And I'm going and he goes well, Richard, what are you going to do about this? And I said, look, you've been through that space before I've been through that space. I have not even seen these things myself. You are all seeing this at the time it goes in raw. And I'm going, everything he said, I completely agree with. And all of those things became JIRAs, and Scott has already addressed them. And in this very next version, every one of the things he said will have been rectified. And so, but it's something as easy as correcting how people talk to each other, or the rationalization as to why they're there, or when they give you the clue to make sure your motivation is proper. Those are easy things for us to realign and address once we know of them. But since you're seeing it raw, everybody just needs to also understand that tell us when you feel these things and see these things. Odds are you've seen it before I have, and definitely before he has. And so speak up. You guys are the beta testers. You're the front lines. But we will address all those things, and that is what will make the game great. Is this dialogue that we'll have. And if you don't want to be spoiled by seeing it in its raw state, then just don't go run the story at the moment, or go find someplace else to play, or ignore the game until it's done. But I think we're in a very excited time, and for those of you who enjoy participating in this beta, you'll get a chance to really see that, especially the story parts, really tune up very, very nicely right now in these next few releases.
Yeah, and just some examples of how we're addressing those priorities. So load times, last release, we got most scenes down to less than 30 seconds, which is a good first step. But our goal is to get it to 15 seconds or less. So that's the real goal. So even we want to get it to half of what it is now, but we still have scenes that are 40 plus seconds, like Central Brittany, and actually all the Brittanies, those are the worst, and Arteris and Xenos. And anyway, and those we're going and specifically targeting. But load times are going to get better, and our goal really again is to get those down to less than 15 seconds. And in mini scenes, it should just be a few seconds, especially if you're on a solid state drive. Because those should be snappy. You want to move from scene to scene to scene.
And it might be worth mentioning how we do that sort of thing. We have good heuristics that the programmers can run, and the scenes that take the really long load times, often it's because 3 or 4 designers have worked on that map over the last 4 years, and each of them puts down trees or grass or bushes or whatever other decoration they think is appropriate, but they each have a slightly different eye as to what they want to build. And so what happens is they don't use the same tree. Each of them goes back in with a different palette of trees. And that means that explodes the amount of unique pieces of art that are on the map, and often the parts and pieces, they all kind of build in slightly different ways. And so we now go back with analytical tools, and we look at the ones that have bad load times, and we go oh look, there's only 3 pine trees on here, and everything else is an oak tree. Let's just remove those 3 pine trees and make them oak trees, and life will be better. And so they can look for the things that are just rarely used, but then blow a load budget and then go address it. And so that's the pass they're doing right now while they're doing decloning and other things, is going in and looking each map where we every day as the game builds, it also automatically spits out these load time metrics, and then the programmer and then the designers can go back and do map analysis to see what the great causes were, and they're cleaning it up right now.
Yeah, and there's also the opposite of that, where there's too many of a single object. So, like building the edge of a roadway, where a designer will have gone in and put a single brick along the entire roadway along all of Xenos, over and over and over and over and over and over to line all of that. So, we need to go back through, and instead of having 10,000 bricks lining the roadway, big long, and it's a technique called mesh combining. So you take all of those individual meshes and combine them into one piece. But you can't just combine all of it into one mega piece, because you have to keep in mind like draw distances and LODs and things like that. So there's kind of an art to it about where you make those breaks and how big you make each object. Because if you make it too big, then it won't LOD properly, etc. So as soon as so right now our focus is on load times. As soon as we get those to where we want them to go, or we feel like there's a good enough momentum there, we're going to start moving and focusing on frame rate. And the first efforts on frame rate will start next release, in release 48. So you should start to see improvements on that. Then the next big thing is going to be reward cycle. So, and there's going to be a lot. There's going to be both broad sweeping ones and very specific ones. So, very specific ones, a lot of it's going to be tied to the virtues. So, there's going to be, for instance, and a lot of it also is going to be focused in both in the starting areas, but then also spreading out from there. So, there's going to be decorations related to the virtues. There's going to be gear related to the virtues. There's going to be emotes related to the virtues, which I'm going to show you guys here in a second. We're also going to be doing a lot of stuff related to crafting with the reward cycle. So, for instance, right now we're going to add a bunch of new components to the game that are unique. So, for instance, when you go and fight elves, when you get a bow off an elf and you salvage that bow, you're going to be able to get an elven bowstring that has a specific set of stats associated with it that you can use in crafting. And so we call those unique components. But then there's going to be even a layer beyond that, which we call boss components, which are actually going to have named components where so if you go fight Torkdal the Troll, he'll have a chance to drop an axe. If you salvage that axe, you'll actually get an axe blade called the Axe Blade of Torkdal, which again that you can use in crafting. And that we're going to start layering those all through. So you're going to get racial components from things like kobolds and elves. You'll also get bosses will have very specific components as well. We're also going to be slightly turning up resource numbers overall, very, very, very slowly and carefully. But we're going to do a slight increase across the board. We're also going to increase the power of tier 2 components because looking at our metrics, we've discovered that people just aren't going to the trouble of really making tier 2 components. What I mean by tier 2 component is like meteoric iron. So that's where you go in refining and you add a secondary component to like iron to make you use an alloy to make a different version of iron. And so we're going to increase the power of those tier 2 components to make it more worth it, because right now it's really just not the stat bonuses you get out of it versus the chance that it's going to be destroyed or whatever, or versus the rarity of the alloys, that those secondary components. The level ever just doesn't match it, and it shows in the stats. I mean, people are just literally are not making it. We're also going to add more artifacts. I asked Chris to make 2 or 3 this release. I think he's going to make like 20 or 30. We're also going to make some really major changes to how artifacts work. So
some of which you won't like.
Some which you will, and some which you won't like. We're going to make it so you can now enchant and masterwork artifacts. But we're also going to make it so you can't repair artifacts. So artifacts are going to cycle out of the system. And the reason we're doing that is because artifacts are cool and they have a lot of power associated with them and they have unique effects, but they also compete directly with the crafting economy. And so in order to balance that, that's why we were going to make them permanently cycle out of the
in fact, something you didn't say that I've been wanting to find a good opportunity to chime in on, which sounds like it, is one of the fun parts about balancing a game. One of the fun parts about this last 20% of time, comes from when you may have heard the story of how we became so devoted to pushing all of the best gear into the hands of the player crafting economy. I mean, it's sort of interesting to see the path we got there. We didn't start by saying that it universally was going to be that way. We started by just saying we wanted to have a powerful crafting system. We wanted players to be able to make good stuff. And then we slowly realized that we really want players to be able to make the best stuff so that they wouldn't have to turn back to the rare drop-off of a raid to get the best stuff, which we think put a limit on the pinnacle of crafters. And then we went from that to, we should just not make stuff. We should literally just put components into the game, put raw materials and components in the world, and push all the crafting to y'all. And for the majority of the project, that's just the way we pitched it. Period. But as we got into playing it, we realized that meant that as an early player, you really don't. Opening up the body of something you've just battled with is an important payoff moment. It's one of these moments where you want to go like, that's cool. And it's not that cool to realize, oh look, I got a sword hilt that I can tear down and get something out of. Until you're much more mature in the game and you realize the value of some of these parts and pieces, you want to open up that corpse and go like a big pile of gold or some rare artifact or something that means something meaningful to you at that point of opening. And that's why we started with the artifacts first in the relatively high level areas. But now all this list that Starr has just mentioned is a way to kind of push that feeling of discovery and participation and the joy of it all the way down to the very beginning parts of the game. And it's not going to be that, like he said, he's going to do 40 or something this release. These aren't hard for us to do, but to make sure we didn't compete with you, these wear out. Yep. And so that way, you won't all become saturated with everybody has the Ring of the Frogkin, in a couple of years because people have mined them all out of the game. So they will wear out and go away.
Another broad systemic change is that we're going to increase the percent chance that you'll get patterns out of salvage. One of the things we did with data mining is basically saw that almost no one is using patterns other than the ones they buy from the store, which is not the intent. So we really wanted people to be able to find and use patterns in the game, but the data basically says that no one's really doing it much. Or not nearly as much as we wanted it to do, and it's basically because the percent is so low, even at Grandmaster level of salvage. So the percent chance to get a pattern when you salvage weapons and gear in the game is going to go up. And again, we're gonna do that slowly and carefully. So we'll do an incremental increase in release 47. We'll see how that goes. We'll look at the data, see how many people are getting patterns, and then we'll go from there. So hopefully you'll see a lot more people using the patterns in the game. Did someone have a?
Oh yeah, you had a question.
Yeah, I was curious. So with the artifacts and grading what they're doing, is photo repairable? Or
No repairable. Artifacts will not be repairable at all. So you'll have to go get new ones.
Does that include the warlock?
What will happen with that one is a fully assembled one will break down into the component parts, and you'll have to reassemble it. So I know this is small.
And one more.
Oh yeah,
question,
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, not right now, but yes, that we know that that's something that needs to be looked at. It's just not on that is a much more complex change to make, and we will get there. That's just not what we're working on right now. So I know this is really small. and if you were watching the stream yesterday, you saw 2 of these, but these are some examples of the virtue rewards that you'll get from questing. So I think the banners have been around for a little while now. We've been introducing those. So there's banners for the 3 principles, the 8 virtues, and then the 1 sweeping axiom of ethical hedonism or / virtue. And then there's 3. Actually, it's going to be 6 pieces of gear. So it's going to be the plate of courage, the leather armor of love, and the cloth of truth. And the cloth of truth I really like too, because in runic it says open your eyes to the truth along the edges of the hood and the sleeve, and those you'll get from questing in the game.
And only that way.
Yeah. And and these are a couple other examples. So we had Scotty make these 2 pieces of decoration. They're paintings of the virtues and the anti-virtues. So it's basically a chart that shows what all the individual virtues are, what all the individual anti-virtues are, and how they're all related to each other. It names all the Kabbalists, etc. And you'll get these from questing as well.
And if you see in the bottom right corner, there's a box that is called the concordance diagram, I believe, and it also shows how virtue and chaos are not opposites, but rather how individual personal will and virtue can live together, and how on the other hand, if you use either of them, autocratically, I'll say, it can lead to the more obsidian path, and so that will show you the relationship between those as well.
And that animation playing, those are some formal virtual salutes that you'll get in the outskirts maps for finishing those quests. We already have 3 like virtue salutes that you get from the students in Arduous, but these are more formal versions of those, and they loop so you can sort of stand at attention and they're based on the poses of the Titan statues. So you can basically stand at attention of one of the 3 principles if you're saluting courage or love or truth. So other priorities, clear player direction. So one of the things we're going to be adding is better labeling for on the overworld and on the compass about what kind of scene a scene is and what level of difficulty it is. So this is one of the things, like, we played around with, like, let's be immersive and have a pile of skulls to tell you, like, how hard a scene is. Like, and, some people found that, most people did not. So on the compass and on the overworld, it's now going to say tier 1 through 5 difficulty. Also, it's going to clearly just say whether a scene is an adventure scene, whether it's a player-owned town, whether it's an actual town. So players will have a better idea about what kind of scene they're going into. There's actually going to be a secondary screen. So how in some screens we have like a little information button that you can click on that adds more info. So, like, for instance, towns are going to have, you'll be able to click on an information button, and that information button will list like all the different shops in that scene. And we'll just add more and more information to that button. Again, all before you load into that scene. So you can know before you take the trouble of loading into that scene what's inside of it.
And on that front also, you all have played enough now to where you've sort of figured it out. But obviously, we want lots of other new people to come join the game. And so while you guys got a chance to play from the chicken room or whenever you joined, and so the UI has evolved around you, for better or worse, you at least have struggled through and managed to figure it out. But new players now have a very complex world to drop into and really need to figure it out. So we've just now begun. In fact, we've gotten a lot of help from our European partner Travian, who's been bringing in waves of people who've never seen the game before, sitting down in front of it and seeing how far can they make it before they get lost. And boy, do they get lost fast. And so we're going through very meticulously now, and and the reason why now is the right time to do that is you have all experienced, like we used to do pop-up help screens or quests in the corner, or we tried all these different experiments before we kind of settled in on what's the best way to relate information to the player. And now that we mostly have that done, we can now go back and both populate that more skillfully, but also make refinements to it. Like we found that a lot of the players didn't even notice that quest was coming up on the left-hand side of the edge of the screen. They didn't really know what that was. And when something popped up like go see the Oracle in big text in the front, it didn't stay there long enough for them to read it. And the go see the Oracle may or may not be the exact same phrase that it now says on the quest on the left. And so what we're going to do is, one, we're going to make sure they'll say the same thing, and when this one shows up, we'll then kind of shrink it down and put it there. You know what I mean? And just that little change, we believe, will both let them read it and see where it goes, and goes, oh, I'll get my clue right there. You get the idea? And so these, again, this is another one of these examples of, it's just a small step technically, which we believe will make a world of difference for people, and they're finding out how to move and interact and know what to do in the world. There's a whole slew of these relatively minor changes, but a pile of them. But we think will really increase the adoption rate of the game substantially.
Yeah, and in addition, anything on the overworld, any scene that you have a quest in, will now have sparkles above it. Sort of the same sparkles that an NPC has. So if you have a quest in that scene, there'll be sparkles above that scene. We also just finished, so we can talk about it finally now. We just finalized the deal with Jacob White on Sota Map, so we now own Sota Map.
Thank you, Jacob.
Yeah. So thank you. So big props to Jacob and big props to the community who helped build all those maps too. That's a huge amount of work. That's going to help us. Having us, it would have cost us a lot to build all those maps. So now we're going to be able to bring that tech and all that content internally. We'll be able to improve how fast it runs, and we're going to be able to add a bunch of features to it, including things like quests will be on it, exit locations on all the scenes will be on it, direction, the location of your house, location of services, all sorts of different new features and stuff now that we own it and can work on it directly. So we're going to automate all of that. It's just it'll all be automated.
Anything that's automatable, we'll put in.
Yeah.
But it depends if the data is available. But yeah.
Yeah.
How does that impact the pledge rewards for map packs that were on?
Good question.
Yeah. We'll come up with some other replacement reward for that. Yeah. Something. Yeah. This generated a lot of questions.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
My thing is about the questing that's going to be on the map. How simplified is you can make it for the questing? Like where when you see the NPC, if it's going to be like the town that you're going to highlight that where the questing.
Let me take that with a philosophical answer. I mean, the individual items, with the code, these things haven't been implemented yet, so it'll vary a little bit on the actual implementation. But let me give you the theory. I'm a big believer that when possible, things should happen in as fictionally reasonable a way as possible. So I like NPCs going like, "Hey, I need to talk to you." That feels good to me. That sometimes you'll see them doing it, but if they're walking to their next thing to go do, they're not doing this all the time. You know what I mean? So it means you could miss them compared to the exclamation point over the head, which you obviously won't miss, but also I find objectionable. But what's interesting is our guy's not just doing this; he also has blue sparkles over his hands. And that is magically breaking that fifth wall kind of thing. And so we're actually going to, first of all, make the sparkle part optional. So you'll be able to turn that off. But then we're going to use the sparkle much more thoroughly. For example, right now, even on your compass, if you have a task that takes you to someplace on this map, the point of interest marker on the compass is actually blue instead of tan, as they normally would be. But I at least find that I miss them. I mean, you're not staring at the compass, and so it's actually easy to miss that there's a blue marker there that would have helped you get to this task if you wanted to. But now we're going to make it to where if you've got the blue sparkles turned on, that point of interest indicator sparkles blue. And so therefore it'll be much harder to miss. And then we're going to do that same thing. If in Sota maps, or frankly even in the outdoor map, you walk by a town and one of your tasks ends in that town, if you've got blue sparkles turned on, that town will be releasing some little blue sparkle emotes. And so we're going to do that everywhere we have the data to drive it. We're now going to add, if you have sparkles turned on, there will be a extra little blue sparkle just so you don't walk past without noticing. But you can always turn that off, and then we'll still do all the fictional ones as much as we can. Lights on in town, smoke coming out of chimneys, those sorts of clues as to what's going on in there. But we'll add the hit you over the head of the club with blue sparkles, both for beginners and for anybody that's just going like, oh, I keep missing the things, so let me make it a little bit more obvious for myself.
Winfield?
Sorry, that's what I was kind of wondering. So those who want to play in kind of an expert mode or a role-playing mode, want as many of those.
Can you turn them off?
Turn it off.
Even the vendors, I may not only want to discover some of them myself. I'm playing with friends in the discovery mode. So it sounds like you're open to have these in a simplified mode as well as more challenging mode.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So is it possible with the Sota map technology to actually be able to see players in your party?
Yes. Yeah, so those are, there's basically a giant launch. Now, how many we get done and how quickly we get done, but it's been a very slow, long negotiation, but we're done. And so we've been waiting and now we can get started, and we have a giant laundry list of those are all the kinds of things that we want to add.
But there are certain things we really need to get in, like finish out all the maps. There's things that you really need.
There's missing maps,
Yeah.
none of all of the new maps we built in the last 6 months aren't even in Sota map. So so first we have to get all those done, and then the next step is to automate all of the housing information, so no one has to do any of that by hand for pods, for instance. So that's step 2. Then step 3 is going to be getting quest locations and exit locations and any data that we can just easily get exposed to the map.
That would be awesome because a lot of ways to use it versus not for adventuring, but for social engagement. You go to the town, you go to the zone, and it's like, where's everybody? Where's
Right.
everybody?
Yeah.
Now you know.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, we have a few more points, and because we're. Let's see,
All right.
how are we doing?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, we only have 15 minutes, so I'm gonna keep moving through well, I'm gonna do 2 more questions, and then go.
Yeah, I was going to say, as long as we still have the ability to have street addresses put in, that's what I did with Kingsport. Because Kingsport actually had the street's name, so I filled in there's next to field in Sota map, so I filled in that with the street address.
So we don't plan, as much as possible, we don't plan on removing features. We just plan on, our goal is to just add.
Yeah, so it's like the first who is there, who's the guy.
Yep.
Yeah.
And are you guys going to do a model 4 kind of deal so that the map doesn't show areas you have to do secret rooms that
That would be a good idea, but that would require significant new tech that's not part of what we've just acquired. So
Yeah.
maybe in the long run that would be appropriate, but.
Yeah, that's a bigger one. All right, let's see. Story polish. So, Richard's been alluding to some of them. One that we just started talking and working on this week, actually, is right now. Well, actually, do you want to talk about this about the
Which one?
NPCs that don't understand? I don't know.
Oh yeah, it's interesting. Going back into the earlier summer when we did, there was a convention here in town, RTX Expo, the Rooster Teeth Expo, and it was actually very pleasant to see that when truly new players sit down and talk to their first NPC and they see a text box show up, they actually start typing, and which I'm proud of. I like that. However, not only then, but also now that we're doing all this testing with Travian, where they're bringing people cold turkey to it. They also say people, when they see a text box, are really excited to experience that moment is exciting, but then something bad happens, which is they get the I don't know what you're talking about. 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 And the original theory was, and we actually trap everything anyone ever says to any NPC in the game. So beware your curse words at our characters. That literally,
Or how much you proposition them.
Yeah.
We know how much you proposition the NPC.
So we literally record all of it. Everything you say to an NPC is recorded. And the intent for that was that Scott Jennings would therefore be able to go back by and go like, oh, the fisherman, everybody keeps asking about flaming fish or nets or whatever it is. We really got to fulfill that desire and make sure they can respond to that. It was the intent. However, it turns out that that's an enormous amount of work that once we started down that path, we realized it doesn't help, because if we respond to nets and flaming fish, which we didn't think there would be any reason to ask about, it means we have to keep writing more and more rat holes that have nothing to do with getting people back on track for what they really need to be doing with that NPC, which is solving some crisis. And so what we're doing is we're making the I don't know more intelligent. And so instead of just dumbly spitting out I don't know, it will respond more like if you ask them for help. How can I help you? The word help already has logic in it that looks at your quest state with them and other things around you to analyze whether you've already helped them find the flaming fish or do the nets, so it doesn't tell you to repeatedly do something you've already done. And so I don't know is being retooled to where instead it goes, if you ask about the flaming fish, it goes like, well, I can't tell you about the flaming fish, but I do know that John at the marketplace needs some fish. And it will turn you back into an actual quest line, or it loops you back into something that the person really should be talking about. And so anyway, we're doing that right now, and we think that'll make the experience of typing a plus instead of a negative.
Would be basic things that all of them know, like where's the gate, where's the apothecary.
The guard, we're in the larger towns, not every town, but in large towns, the guards, we have the capability that any NPC can inherit a pool of knowledge. And so, but we've only created those pools of knowledge for guards in large towns so far. We could do many more, but again, it goes back to the same thing where we realized that we could quickly take people on rat holes. If you start letting them answer questions that really aren't their purpose in life, people end up wandering away from the thing we really want them to talk about. Yeah.
Another big part of story polish is more examples of the virtues, more side quests. I mean, you'll see more of this every release. Reworking of quests and scenes. So we redid Spite and Malice. Not Spite, Malice. We redid Malice last release to make that entire that flow and that experience much cleaner, and we're going to be doing that throughout. And this release, the whole Path of the Oracle, that conversation with Arabella in the finale about the Shroud and the prophecies, that's much cleaner. Again, direct feedback from players. So again, don't be afraid as you're playing the story and you're like, well, this
if you're going, it doesn't
this
make
flow
sense.
doesn't make sense.
Why did they do that?
I don't understand why that person said that, or I need a better guidance in this area. Just give us that feedback. I mean, again, we've got the framework in, and now we're in the part of like making it really sing. So, and that's going to be more and more each release. Yes, Jack.
With the addition of the side quests, are you going to add more
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
actual solutions? So there's not just one solution to the quest. Kind of like think of the claim quest, spoiler alert everybody, at the end, Myron asks you to kill him, and you have that option of kill him, do I not, what
Yes, those are exactly what a lot of these individual side quests are for. And just so you guys will also understand how we approach the design of these stories. Like, let's go back to Ultima 4 as a case study. That's where we first started. Where I first started putting virtue into these stories. I'm personally a believer that if you are trying to, if the goal of the story is to teach you about virtue, well, you still have to make them stop and do some physical things along the way just to sort of gate the content. But to me, whether that is I find a magic key to open a magically locked door, or I find a big axe to chop through a wooden door, or I find a cannon to shoot down some door. I don't really think it matters which of those three it is fundamentally, because really none of them have to do with virtue. It really, you just pick the one that the game does well, right? You once you have all the systems in place, you go, okay, well, how am I going to, what puzzle, what physical obstruction am I going to put in front of this to impede your progress until you've done some busy work? That, you know, the main story thread just sort of takes you through these gates. It's the but even those gates you only fill in once you kind of get the systems all on board. Now that you have the thing metered out, and so the Tracy Hickman story, so to speak, is the overarching where to go, who to meet, why to feel the certain tragedies are befalling certain people along the way. But your spiritual journey, so to speak, really comes from, we want you to have not only quest moments that have these points of ambiguity, but a constant slow burn of regular behaviors day in and day out, where you can act honestly or not, act compassionately or not, act valorously or not, and therefore drive your karma in those areas up and down. But again, we needed a lot of the framework present before we could go, okay, now we know what the game does well. It's like